Hello, everyone, and a very, very, very warm welcome. I'm Caroline Lindsay, President of the Professional Saddle Fitters Association, the psfa.org. And I'm a second-year PhD student, loving every minute, and I'm studying the rider performance and the effect on the horse. And primarily, I will be focusing on pain and how that affects the rider's posture. And I'm a veterinary physiotherapist by trade, a certified saddle fitter, a graduate human sports therapist, and a certified lecturer. You can see I'm so excited, can't you? But we at the PSFA are so excited to welcome our very, very special presenters tonight. We have Emma, who is a talented rider, and two innovative saddle designers, Maria Hallring from Ergo X2 in Sweden and Bradley Well from Ipotane, who is close to launching his amazing new saddle design. So he's been putting a lot of geeky content into his presentation tonight. Please join the PSFA public page on Facebook for updates. And we are a saddle fitting resource sharing organisation, and we love to learn. So we are building our YouTube channel. So please keep an eye on us. So I would first of all introduce you to Emma, who will share her screen.
Emma?
Yes.
While you're doing it, just let people know here a little bit about yourself.
My name's Emma Dair, and I've been involved in horses all my life. I did stop riding kind of in my early 20s, had my two children, and got quite heavily overweight. I never stopped keeping horses. Both my children rode, and then about 2.5 years ago, decided I really wanted to ride again. But the weight, having excess weight, really just triggered kind of confidence issues and fear and lots of other things. So I suppose at the moment I work full time in cattle genetics and in IT in that sector. And I have 5 dressage horses at the moment and 2 ponies at home, so they keep me busy. I've just started doing bit and bridle fit here in Ireland because there's a real need for kind of specialist tack fitters here. And then we're moving to really getting into the whole technology side of it in collaboration with some PhDs in MTU in Cork to do lots of analysis on rider and horse as they work as a unit and separately. So I'll just carry on.
This is worth waiting for, everybody.
I hope so. I'll carry on. There's my introduction. You can see that now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
and that was up before, so we can just go to
I can carry on.
Yeah.
So just to talk a little quickly about really what kind of kickstarted my whole weight loss, weight realization, I suppose, and the challenges that I had and what I tried to do. I suppose the challenges was I really didn't know. I would just be eating all the time, I suppose, haze eating, I heard it called, whereas you don't actually realize that you could be sitting there eating a bag of crisps and then eat another one. You don't realize that you're just continually eating. And then what I call panic eating. And for me, that would be coming into the evening and my body would be feeling hungry, but it would start to get into this panic where it's, oh, you have to have something to eat now. So kind of my brain was not even engaging in saying, right, well, you're going to have your dinner in 20 minutes. It was, you have to eat 3 bags of crisps and a double decker now. And then eat your dinner. And I think that for me was quite difficult to get control of, that whole kind of frenzy. You have to have something to eat. and that really did take a while to get control of, but I'll talk about the solutions and how I did after. So, and I also had, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I had this all or nothing mindset where, as if I did have a slice of cheesecake, well, that was it. My diet was gone out the window. I might to forget it. I'm going to be fat for the rest of my life, yada yada yada. And until I, realised that it's okay, to have the slice of cheesecake, and it doesn't really. You have to stay on an even keel. So, and then what I found, I really didn't know what to eat for my body type, for my age. I was trying to eat healthily, what I thought was healthily, but I was feeling really hungry. So then I would just then go out for Chinese, which is actually okay, but I couldn't find that balance of how to eat kind of healthily without thinking, oh well, I can only have a lettuce leaf today. And then I didn't really want to stop riding, even though at my heaviest, I suppose I was weighing 27 plus. I'd only just come back to riding, and I had the same horse for, he's 10 now, but I just didn't want to hurt him either, or his, and I did have some bad falls off him, and I was really, really suffered with my confidence and fear. So I suppose I just talk about how I got through some of these things and how I got out the other side. So really for me, it was how to get control of my eating and learning what to eat for me. And that took a long time, and a lot of trawling through Google and talking to nutritionists. I'm very lucky. There's a guy in the town where I live who does really healthy meals, and he prepares each meal for what I need. So I didn't have to worry about having to cook in the evening for myself. It was already just planned out. So I only had to kind of worry about my breakfast and my lunch. And then because I cooked for my family, I could just cook them whatever they wanted, which is, made it a lot easier for me. And he's been really pivotal in helping me get control of and teaching me what I can eat. And 1,200 calories isn't enough. If you're out riding horses and farming and living your life, you need to eat enough to sustain your body and lose weight, but in the right way, in the right ratios. And then also that, like, there's no wrong foods, because for me, if I couldn't have a glass of wine or a slice of cheesecake, what would be the point, really? I didn't want to be on a fad diet. I just needed it to work for me, so I just needed to educate myself. But it meant that I had to take control of my life and give myself time to do it. And I also found that it was okay to have an off day, that if I really wanted McDonald's, then that was okay too. Having one day where you blow 2,500 calories isn't going to make you overweight overnight. So I did keep riding, even though I only did short bursts on my horse at the time. Maybe kept it under 10-15 minutes worth of schooling, just because I was just so conscious of my weight. But I did have my saddle checked every 3 months. We've actually changed the saddle 4 times in the last 2.5-3 years. I have my physio every 4 weeks to check him, and I have physio on myself as well, because I find that I get out of line, and then that doesn't help my balance. And then I just started to become much more body and balance aware of my own body, not on a horse, just in general. I just even running upstairs or doing the housework, which I hate, just all started to become easier.
I have a question, Emma.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. So you started as an elite young rider,
Mm-hmm.
and at what point did you feel the weight going on, or did this start in your childhood? Were you aware that you might have to control your weight later, or?
No, I think definitely for me it was my first pregnancy, because I'd say in the first and second trimester of my first pregnancy, I was riding the horse I had at the time and still fitting into my size 10 show jacket. And then by the time I had her, I was probably a size 16, and it just escalated from there because I rode, I suppose because I produced horses then from a young rider up until my kind of mid-20s, I was riding all day, always active. And then I had my children, and then I went into an office job. So I went from being really, really active to sitting for 7.5 hours a day. And I think that is where the weight just started to it just kept going. Because obviously when I was in my 20s, I could eat what I wanted because I was probably burning huge amounts of calories riding.
Okay. I just want to just bring Bradley in here. Why do women put weight on when they are, or why do some women find it difficult to revert to their pre-pregnancy weight? What is this about?
Well, there's a lot of aspects to that. Mainly is to do with hormonals. But what you've also got is post-pregnancy. You've also got breastfeeding, which has an influence, because if you are breastfeeding, then obviously your body has to kind of produce as much milk as possible, and your body goes into a survival mechanism, which then also that carries on for the child as well, or for the newborn. There's also, especially post-pregnancy, you've got things like postnatal depression as well, which has a huge impact. Because if you have postnatal depression, then you never feel good enough in any way, shape, or form. So then trying to lose weight, and you've got to look at the fact of losing weight takes a lot of conscious effort. You have to be very, very aware of everything. You have to be very aware of your mental voice, which is talking to you all the time and telling you, okay, as Emma said, is she would have an all or nothing approach, and then all of a sudden you suddenly have cheesecake and it just suddenly explodes. And you sit there and go, if you are also suffering with postnatal depression and generally life getting in the way, because you've got to imagine if you've just had your first child, it is an experience. Once you've had your second or third or fourth, you kind of are what's coming. With your first child, you do not know what's coming. It hits you like a steam train. So you're there learning kind of and panicking. You spend your first year panicking about looking after the child in front of you. How many nappies has it done? How many poos has it done? How many this? Has it fed enough? Has it done this, that, and the other? So you, are much like your personal relationships and friendships, go down the rung of the ladder of focus. Your first focus when you're a mum or a dad is that it's that little kind of baby in front of you. You kind of quite happily ignore yourself. You are kind of just going, right, the priority is that little thing which eats, and then I'll grab food afterwards, or so on and so forth. Now that instills then bad eating habits, and there's a myriad of other things which also kind of continue after that. But that's on the assumption that you have a normal pregnancy. And I mean that in the most polite way possible. You've also got to consider that during pregnancy, you can get gestational diabetes, which has a huge impact upon kind of people then trying to lose the weight afterwards. You also have, whether you have had IVF or a natural conception, because if you are having IVF, then you're pumping your body full of hormones, and your whole psychology and approach to pregnancy is completely different than if you are lucky enough to kind of conceive naturally. So all of these types of things not only have an impact on you on a physiological level, they also have an impact upon you in terms of your psychology as well. And that's what you're trying to marry. And this is why weight and rider weight issues are really kind of difficult to unpick, because you can look at the science, but you've also then got to consider the psychology and the emotions and the history behind it. And that becomes really, really difficult, because some people, like Emma, she realized her eating habits. She kind of took control of that. She became very conscious of that. And she put in strategies in order to get over that. which is absolutely fantastic. Now, some people they don't recognise if they're eating badly. I know that sounds very odd. And it's quite fascinating with weight and food is that we make excuses, or we do actually forget. You know, I was chatting to a colleague and kind of client of mine, and said, "Oh, right. So how many kind of sugars have you had? You know, how many sugary drinks and kind of had chocolate bars?" And she said, "Oh, no, none whatsoever." And I sat there and I went, "Well, that's a bit of a lie because I was sat kind of with you for half a day, and you had 3 chocolate bars in the car." And she was like, "Oh, I forgot about those." Yeah, I see. And you're kind of like, right, okay. So that's and you people actually forget. So this is why losing weight or kind of weight as an issue, it takes a monumental focus and a monumental consciousness awareness for you to actually try and lose that weight, because there's so many barriers to stop you from losing that weight.
Yeah. Something just occurred to me there as you were speaking, Bradley. It sounds to me, obviously pregnancy is very primal, and it sounds to me like this primal urge to feed the child, maybe we're tipped over the edge, that we just, there's overkill on it, on our calorie consumption, that our body wants to say, look, you've got a child to feed now, you've got to eat. But we're not in the hunter-gatherer environment now. So
what's quite fascinating is that how food has changed over the decades. And food has considerably changed. When you start looking at food chains and systems, which we have put in place, and different countries have different things. You know, you generally look at the calorific kind of content, but what happens is your nutritional value of that kind of has also dropped. You know, the whole psychology of a lot of Western culture is more about speed. You know, how quickly can I get the food and how kind of thing, so I can then chill out, and that lays into more of the how we approach life and how we approach work. You know, we spend a lot of our time working, and then we spend a very little amount of our time actually chilling out and relaxing. And food is kind of reduced in terms of its importance within our kind of culture. Now that's not true of every culture. You know, you sit down with the Italians, Christ, they don't have TVs on or anything like that. It's a whole family dynamic of sitting around for 4 hours, kind of just sat on the kitchen table talking. So you have to kind of look at that. But our food systems, our food chains are slightly out of whack, and that's because of our psychology, our sociological psychology.
And I have this opinion that most of us are malnourished, regardless of what weight you are. We're malnourished, and a lot of us have carbohydrate addiction. So once you get into that sugar cycle, like you say with your friend with the chocolate bars, it's like you have to have this sugar and top it up. And of course there's processed food that I think almost the food is made to look like it's not processed, but it is. But we have all the sugar and salt dumping in the UK. Maria, I've got to bring you in here, because when I spent time in Sweden, they have like miles of pick and mix sweets, and they have fika, which is the tradition, or the almost like a ritual of during the day when you have your coffee, you have lots of amazing sweet things. But I don't recall seeing an obese person in Sweden, so we need to move over there if we need to learn about.
I think we have a lot of overweight. We have a lot of overweight in Sweden, but not at that really obese rate that you might see in the States.
Okay.
We do consume the most sweets. in the world, I think. And we also have the fika thing, but we're also very aware of the food because kids get proper lunch at school. They
Yeah.
are taught about, we teach them about food. So people in Sweden are quite aware about food. I think that what Bradley's onto is important here, that we're actually living in fear. Either we are afraid of something or we're exhausted. And whenever we are afraid or exhausted, the brain actually signals us to eat. So we, the brain is hardwired to kind of fuel us up, or to help us through hard times. So I think that stress is the main driver. We eat because we're stressed. We eat because we're exhausted. We eat because we're afraid, and we don't even register, like Bradley said, that we eat anymore. So it's a society thing. It's not a rider issue. It just becomes
Yeah.
a perceived problem for some riders where it's not really a problem, and then it becomes a real problem when, of course, you can't fit yourself into a saddle or onto your horse without it becoming an issue for you. Or I think Emma was going to talk about that also, the differences of how she felt riding,
Yeah.
between, the weights. So I
Yeah.
want to hear that.
Yeah. Emma, just remind us how much
Yeah.
weight you lost in pounds and kilos and stones.
So I suppose I was probably over 21 stone at my heaviest about, I'm going to say 3 years ago now, just as we went into lockdown.
Is that about 250 pounds or more?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll look that up.
Okay. And I weigh about 14 and a half at the moment. Fluctuates between 14 and a half up to 15 and back down again.
So you lost 30% of your weight.
Yeah, I'm only 5'4", so all my weight is in the middle of my body. So that I'm still quite small on top, but all my hips and my tummy, that whole area was where I carry my weight. So it was a huge, as it's made a huge difference. And now I'm kind of used to less weight now. I want to go down a little bit more, but because I still feel, I'm probably a size 18 in clothes, 20 sometimes in pants, 16 on top maybe. So it just, for me, yes, it was a huge amount of weight, but I didn't really, I did see it at the time, but I think when you take it off slowly, like I suppose it was about a year and a half, I just noticed I was able to do more quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Putting on my shoes was easier.
So, Emma, were you fit? Talk about your fitness before you had your children.
I was incredibly fit. I was probably a size 8 to 10. I was riding possibly 10 to 15 horses a day. We had between 40 and 45 horses on the yard all the time. So, and I was, I'm not going to say I'm marathon fit because I've never liked to run, but I certainly was a very, very fit person. And I just think once I started a desk job and I was kind of, you can't move for 7.5 hours. Your body just goes, well, what are you doing? And I didn't slow my eating at that stage.
Okay.
And I think that, didn't, because I was young, I guess that I think, I was in my 20s. It didn't really hit me until I saw a picture of myself and thought, because I knew that I was obviously overweight and I knew that my clothes were getting bigger and I was wearing baggier clothes, but I didn't. And then I'd see a picture of myself and I'd go, is that me? Is that what I look like? Yeah. And I thought, this has got to stop.
So tell us what that did to your confidence, your riding, your. I mean, we'll move. You've got a slide on the effects of the saddle on that. So
Yeah, like
your
to that.
balance. How is it? What is it when you come from a trim rider to being overweight to losing the weight? So what's the physiology of that and the psychology?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, particularly when I started riding again a couple of years ago after having a 20-year break, that my brain, I would sit on a horse the same way that I sat on a horse when I was fit, when I was younger. I was still in the same posture, but my brain was like, okay, so you can do this, you need to do this, this, and this. And my body just could not do it. And I would get internally quite frustrated then, because like obviously I'm a very instinctive rider and have good feel, so I would feel something on my horse and know I needed to make an adjustment in my own body. My brain would say do it, and my body would go, oh, sorry, that's not happening today. And that has taken me a long time, and I'm still working on that, because I think it's had a huge impact on my confidence and my balance, and my getting core strength, and I suppose psychologically that I've really felt, well, I'm never going to be able to ride as well as I could ride, and that really disheartened me, because it was just sad, because it's always been part of my life and it's always been my passion, and I don't think I should have ever. Okay, I probably shouldn't have stopped riding, but circumstances just I just couldn't. I'm a single parent at the time, so there was just no way I would risk it.
Did you lose motivation feeling like that? Did you feel defensive, or did you feel like I got to fix this? No, was there a switch between those two?
There was, especially I think at the very, very beginning, when I thought to myself, is this, I can remember thinking, will I just stop? Why am I, about 6 weeks in to coming back riding, I was like, I just can't do it. I just can't do this. The fear was kicked in. I'd fallen off him, and he'd tripped over, and I'd come off him over his head. And I just thought to myself, why am I putting myself under this huge pressure? And I was giving myself all these excuses as to why I shouldn't do it. And, I should just loan him out and forget about it. But in my heart, it's not what I wanted to do. In my heart is I wanted to do it. And I would be absolutely nauseous at the thought of going to ride, but I'd still go. And I would be in tears thinking, I just want to be able to get on him like I could get on horses 20 years ago, and just nothing would worry me. I'd just be one with the horse I was on, and I haven't quite got back to that feeling yet, because the confidence with the weight still affects my fears.
So did you meet, or if you would meet a saddle fitter when you are in that place in your life, what would be the most difficult thing? What are you thinking about when you are then, maybe trying to get a saddle that's going to help you a little bit? If you as a rider would try to see if, would you look for that option? And
I think so. And I have a very good relationship with the saddle fitter here in Ireland. And I know her very well, and she knows me, and she knows my horses. And she knows when she came to fit Mac's first saddle for me, his first dressage saddle, I was terrified to even get on him with a new saddle in case he did something. Not that he was going to, but anyway. But she was incredibly understanding, and we went through a whole, she would try a saddle on him. If it fitted him, I would sit on it on the saddle block
Yeah.
on the book. If I felt comfortable, then we would put it on him, and I would get on him and sit. And I think, and then she would like, can you walk? Because obviously when you're saddle fitting, you really need to see the rider walk, trot, and cantering, and do whatever they need to do with their potential new saddle. And I couldn't, because the fear, because of my weight, wouldn't allow me to get past that kind of stage. And I think having her say to me, that's okay, you don't need to trot him. I would like to see him trotting. And she really did help me through that first appointment that I had with her. And then I think before that, and I still do it at the moment, I have a GP or a jump saddle. And so I, for a heavier rider, to be able to put your knees behind something always makes you feel a bit more secure. Having a deeper seat, and to have a saddle that fits you as well as the horse is so important, because it really does impact on your security and your balance and your posture, and those are really key to help you kind of move forward then. So I just put these I just put a few points together on how I feel my weight affects my saddles on my own horses. I just quickly talk about saddle size and design, and I think I have a range of horses I have 14.3 cob up to my dressage horse is 16.3, but everything always has to fit the horse, because you can't put an 18-inch saddle on a cob that's it just can't work. If they've only can take a 16-inch saddle, then you need to think about getting a different design possibly. I mean, I know there are designs out with shorter panels and bigger seats, how that works, and Bradley might be able to tell us whether that works or not. I'm not sure. And I find that I've gone through quite a few saddles now to find the right one with each horse. But I think that's normal. But and then for me, girth fit and design was a huge thing. He's the bay horse you see in the video in a minute. He's a particularly sensitive horse. So I think that's important, because and it kind of goes into this next point that I have, a saddle movement. When you're a heavier rider, the saddle can move in a really abnormal way when you move or you lose your balance, that potentially wouldn't do the same with a lighter rider. So I just think it's girth fit needs to play a really big part in saddle fit. And then and saddle slippage, I kind of put this in because I'd be checking all the time about saddles moving forward particularly, and how to counteract that, because obviously if you're heavier and you're pushing the saddle more forward, then it impacts on the pressure points on either side of the withers. And I think for a dressage horse in particular, well, I suppose in any discipline, they need to be able to get their shoulders and use their shoulders correctly. So I would be getting my saddle fitter, she just changes the flocking slightly, or I might put a wider bar into a saddle that I have that's adjustable, or put a narrow bar in, depending on the time of the year and the workload and how I feel their saddle is on them when I'm on them.
Yeah.
And then obviously I am so ridiculously over the top about making sure my saddles fit and that I can be in the best shape I can. So I have physio, and I'd be checking. And a good tool I use all the time is I video myself all the time. It's such an eye opener, and I watch myself back every day when I ride. I think, oh my God, is that actually me? What am I doing? What is my chicken arm doing? Because we'd be trotting down the centre line, and my left leg would be moving and my right elbow would be doing a chicken dance. And until you video yourself, you're not aware of these things.
And of course, we do look bigger on film than in real life, don't we? So they say you put on about 10 pounds in a photograph.
Yeah, well.
Maria, could I just very quickly, before we see this lovely film, but what's your view on just flocking? How do you address the heavier riders in terms of the flocking, the remedies on the saddle? What are they?
Well, we need science on this, I would say. Of course, you do need more flocking because it is going to be compacted. As you know, when you use wool, it goes down. And if you have more impact with the horse and rider meeting, that flocking is going to be compacted. And if it becomes too compact, it doesn't work. The density isn't working anymore. So yes, I think we need to look at the saddle more often, probably, if we have a heavier weight rider. But we also need to have a saddle where the panel is more stable. So we don't need a soft, mushy panel because it's going to make that movement worse. A lot of people today think that, by having soft things under the saddle, that they are helping, but they're actually destabilizing. And I think, Emma, you mentioned that you don't want to be destabilized. So you need, sometimes you can even use a very good pad. I'm not talking of lamb's wool pad, but of a shock absorber. And that shock absorber will then stay in place. It won't be thick, it won't move, but it will help the situation some. And I think in the next 10 years, we're going to start getting science on how shock absorption works with different kind of trees and different kinds of stuffing and different kind of loads. There's lots of work to be done on this. So right now, I think all we have is our experience, from fitting of what we see working. And one of the things that I see a lot of is that we tend to make very large seat sizes for riders because they are, they seem big because they're overweight. But these riders end up sliding around in these saddles because their pelvis isn't that big. So there needs to be some kind of in between here. You cannot just fit because the bum, the fluffy part, as we say, it seems big. You also need to give that rider a firm foundation where they can find their position easily and stay in neutral, because that is ultimately going to help the horse.
Yeah, I've been waiting for the trend of saddle pads to really take off, because from my perspective, with 80% of riders experiencing chronic back pain or having had back pain, why wouldn't they use a pad? So that you've got to reduce the shock for the rider's back, for their spine. And of course, so many of them are asymmetrical, but that's a whole other summit.
Yeah,
I just wanted to bring that in.
Actually, the wool is quite good when it comes to shock absorption. It has, when you test it, it is quite good. The back problem, I think, actually comes more from riders not being in neutral, trying to negotiate, coming from slightly rolled, slightly tilted backwards. That means that the back muscle has to resist so that the spine doesn't get pressed backwards.
And because of the back pain, I mean, Bradley will say more on this, but as well as the paddles, but with back pain, the mechanics of the lumbopelvic junction, they don't work, or they don't function as well as they would in a pain-free back or an uninjured back. So I think, as you say, saddle pads, that's something we need to embrace, and not just embrace, but prescribe.
Yeah, but we need to know
Individually.
exactly what we're doing. So,
Yes.
so
Yes.
we,
Yeah.
I think this is going to develop also. We see that when it comes to back pain, we have had the results of actually relieving bad back pain related to surgeries instantly within 20 minutes from somebody getting seated in a neutral position that is supported. Their back pain would actually drop. And some of them may almost faint from that pain dropping because it changes the body. So position is extremely important, and we cannot produce it. Riders learn to produce position, and that is a problem for them.
Great. Bradley, sorry, actually, I forgot. I didn't give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves. But obviously, you're the osteopath here, as well as the saddle designer. So what would you add to, unless it's in your slides later, what would you add to that?
There's not really a lot I could add. Maria's hit a lot of the subjects which are, when you over compress a material, it suddenly then turns from soft and fluffy to hard. And we have a big problem. And that's slightly to do with psychology of how we interact with products, how we interact with a saddle. We assume if a saddle panel is lovely and soft and squidgy, then that's going to be good. But the problem is then you sit there and go, well, it's lovely, soft and squidgy, and as Maria said, it then destabilizes. So now you're having to then put something else in to stop the destabilization, and it then becomes almost that you're chasing. My argument with the whole process of saddle pads is that if a lot of people are using them, so for example, if 70 or 80% of the equine populace are using saddle pads, there's your problem. Because it's like supplements. It's not supplementary. It's not in addition of. There's a failing within the actual product, which is not providing enough support or enough of the kind of protection for horses, for riders. A saddle pad should always be, or an additional saddle pad should always be there to help through transitionary periods. Not be something which, and you go to yards and they just kind of go, right, yeah, well, we have this base saddle pad, and then we have this one, and then that one's a shimmerable, and then we add a gel pad to also then. So suddenly you're looking at about kind of 3, 4, 5 centimeters of extra padding on top of that, and then they say, oh yeah, but we've got a close contact saddle, and you sit there and go, right, I'm a bit confused here. So this is where the problem comes with product design and product, kind of evolution and manufacture, because you sit there and go, Maria's absolutely right. You need a lot more science. You need to categorically, if you're going to prescribe or adjust or do anything, you need to have the facts behind you to go, right, we know that material, when it's compressed over a certain load, then it will collapse, or we know that material is under another load, then that's going to collapse. So then you suddenly go, well, okay, you're within that bracket, and okay, you could have that material, you could have that material. There's a whole system which can be implemented. Geez, it's been implemented in cars, it's been implemented in bikes, it's been implemented in kind of myriads of other sports, which all deal with compression, which all deal with kind of dynamic patterns. Exactly. Yeah. So you sit there and go, it exists in every other sporting industry. It is just very much a restricted evolution. They don't kind of certain individuals and certain kind of elements of the industry do not want to progress, or they find evolution, they find progression slightly difficult because it's scary, it's weird, and everyone's a little bit fearful of making mistakes. And you sit there and go, but you've got to make mistakes, but the whole point of making a mistake is to learn from it. If you make a mistake and you carry on, there's your problem. That's just butting your head against a brick wall. That's never going to work. So you've got to kind of evolve, and that's what I'm massively keen on, is trying to evolve this industry, because I've worked in Olympic sports, like myriads of Olympic sports, and you sit there and go, hang on, bikes. You look at something as simple as a racing bike. You can look at different gel seats which exist for racing bikes, and that's for different loads and different positions and so on and so forth. And you just sit there and go, right, okay, well, they're 10, 15, 20 years ahead than us. So it's Maria's hitting all of the kind of major headlines, and you just sit there and go, I can go into a huge amount of detail. That I have no problems with that, but that would be a 24-hour lecture.
Other thing.
Kind of make everybody a little bit tired.
Yeah.
But,
So let's.
It's huge.
Caroline, mute. Okay, Emma, can you bring us back to your next slide? Because we agreed and we touched on all of you here.
This is a cycle seat with lots of gel foam, whatever in it. So that's where they're going with that.
Yeah. Oh, they're going there. There's lots of interesting things there. Okay, are we going to see a video?
Yeah, so I just have a short video. It's about 1.5 minutes long. It's of me trying to ride, I'm going to say. I'll talk away over the top of it and shout if you want me to pause it and we want to talk. So this is me riding Mac, trying to do a prelim dressage test. Probably about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I'd been back riding probably about 6 to 8 weeks at the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he'd had 2 years off, clipped him out, and off we go.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not stable. I've got no core. My arms are flapping. So because I'm just going to pause it there if I can.
Mm.
Because my arms are flapping and I'm not sitting still, I'm annoying him, even though he isn't fit. He's unhappy. You can see he's unhappy. I'm unhappy. I'm uncomfortable. But funnily enough, okay, I lost a lot of weight, but not the big portion of weight. So when you see the next bit, so this is him having his little book, which he doesn't do. This is probably 6 months on, maybe 9 months on, in the same school, having a lesson. I don't have many lessons. He's happier. I've got a better saddle. My position's better because I'm more stable, even though I'm still turning my toe out. But I'm working more through my core, so my balance is better. So I'm better able to affect him positively. So this is us back to cantering on the other rein. He going disunited. He can't stay underneath me because I'm tilting. And this is the other rein. Well, again, it's the same day, 6 to 9 months ahead of time. And this is both our bad reins, but my weight hadn't changed that much, but my strength had, and my core had. Which affected my balance so much.
So your advice for someone is that even if you feel that you're overweight, do get into a program that will help you with your balance and your core, and do
absolutely.
It off the horse. Is that
off
something
the horse?
That you did also?
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. I was quite strict with myself on what warm-up I did before I got on the horse. I also kept my riding to short blocks of time so that I wasn't, and not particularly like walking, sitting on a horse is quite hard work for them. So I would warm him up on the lunge so that when I got on him, I would be warmed up, he would be warmed up. We could get straight into doing 10, 15 minutes, really good work. And then I'd get off. He would be happy. I would be happy. And I just slowly worked like that day by day by day.
I'm happy you bring that up, because a lot of people think that sitting on the horse walking is something that they can do hour in and hour out.
No,
and
definitely
walking
not.
is actually the worst.
Yeah.
For the horse when it's loaded in a way that it's not using its back correctly because it rotates much more in a walk, and it doesn't connect or activate the muscles that's going to help it. So it's a good advice to actually warm up being on the ground, and then when you get on, you go into the trot and the canter work, and then you get off.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. And I spent a lot of time doing groundwork with him so that I could spend time with him, but working on my fitness and my elasticity and my stability. Because obviously, I mean, like, I'm still 14 and a half stone, and some people would say that's still too heavy. I'm well within that 20% weight limit, rider horse ratio weight, but I think I can help him, all my horses, much more positively if I lose more weight, but also if by losing the weight, it helps me get stronger. And I think it's really the key. Yes, you've got to think of the horse welfare, so you can't just get on a 12-2 show pony when you weigh as much as I do. But my horse, he's 16.3. He's quite able to carry me, but I can't help him if I have no strength or balance.
So what difference did you notice in him when you changed after you got more fit, even though you didn't lose that much weight?
So I really noticed the change in he was able to work much more freely through his back, over his back, and make that connection from hind leg to bit, that circular connection that we try in dressage. And I really, really struggled with him to get him in an outline, in a consistent outline, working from behind before, because I tried hundreds of different bits and all sorts of things, thinking, oh, maybe he doesn't like this, maybe he doesn't like that, maybe he wants a plastic bit, or maybe he just wants a egg butt snaffle, maybe doesn't like a Frenchling. But actually, in hindsight, it wasn't anything to do with the bit. It was to do with the fact that I didn't have the balance or the strength to help him work in that proper connection.
I think that's a very important takeaway here.
For me, what you're, which is a revelation, is that you shouldn't, perhaps, or riders shouldn't focus on how much they weigh. They need to focus on how strong they are. So anybody who is perhaps fighting or struggling with the weight, if they can take the pressure off and say, look, I need to get stronger, that, I think that can be easier than sitting there hungry. And also the other benefit is that you're burning calories, you're upping your metabolism right from the word go. So that is a very, very important take-home message there. Bradley, what would you add to this before we move on to Maria's presentation?
In some regards, I wouldn't actually there's not a lot to add. The only one thing I would potentially add, which we all kind of forget, and we're always kind of focusing on the horse, like the rider weight thing. What Emma has also flagged is that in this video, she just basically got on and started riding, and you sit there and go, there's an evolution of Emma losing her weight. There's also a corresponding evolution of the horse getting stronger as well. So the one thing which we've also got to consider in this is the muscle density, or the tone of the horse's musculature. As Emma is losing the weight, you've got the horse, which is just like us going to the gym and doing exercise. We're going to be getting more and more toned. So, and in the images of kind of Emma, what was it, 9 months later?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So 9 months later, you sit there and go, that horse's musculature, that horse's muscle tone, that horse's muscle density would have got harder. And hardness is a big kind of word, because there's a lot of connotations to it. But what I mean is the muscle tone actually increases. So you have this kind of dropping of weight of one side, but increasing of muscle tone on the other, and that's where you get that kind of lovely marriage in the middle. And that's the one thing, and that's where we, Maria and
that's where we need, that's where we need to meet.
that's where we need to be. But that's also where saddles and materials and various things like that, in terms of density values and various things like that. Like, I'm a big advocate for measuring density of horses, and the density of muscle, and the density of, and there are tools which exist to measure density. They actually exist. So you sit there and go, well, if I know the density of the horse's muscle, and you're just starting out your career, then I can put in the density of your saddle corresponding and get that correction. Then as your horse gets stronger, and as you lose weight, or as you get stronger as well, then you can then play around with that density of materials. But you've also got to consider, as I said, the horse's musculature and tone is also going to be increasing as well. We've always got to remember there's two things at play here. The rider kind of losing the weight and getting stronger and more balanced, which is absolutely fantastic. But then the horse is also doing exactly the same thing as well.
And you've come on a really good point there, Bradley, because I must admit that because Mac has arthritis in both front feet, I worked hugely on his core strength.
Yeah.
So I would ride for 10-15 minutes, I would get off, I would untack him, and then I'd go work on groundwork exercises with him in hand to work on his core strength and coordination, not realizing I was working on my own core strength and ground and kind of coordination with him, if you know what I mean, because I was clambering over the poles as well. And I think making that huge effort to kind of work on both of us at the same time, and not just in the saddle, but out of the saddle as well, has really reaped benefit for us.
And that's where, training a horse is, and training the horse in saddle fitting, training the horse for the rider, training the rider. We could do a whole seminar about training and the methodologies and the approaches of training, because you sit there and go, how do you train a horse, to make it core strong and so on and so forth, because what is your starting value and where do you want to go? Because those are always there, and that's a whole nother talk in the podcast.
But there is an interesting point to take away from what you're saying, Bradley, and what Emma is saying here, and that is that as a saddle fitter, we need a starting point where we can say either that this horse actually today has too little muscle density, it just doesn't have enough to carry you in a saddle because the muscles aren't strong enough, or they are so weak that you may not get more than 10 minutes out of this situation before these muscles are going to fatigue because there's just too little of them. And that means that you are going to have to do a lot of in-hand work before you can expect to ride a little longer and to be on. And I think, Bradley, we need to talk about this because there's a guideline needed about this, because a lot of people will actually fit saddles to a horse that doesn't have any muscle. And it really doesn't matter if you're 15 kilo or 30 kilo overweight, still the horse is going to fatigue too early.
Yep, exactly. And that's what I mean is the whole point, the way I approach things is by having an objective marker, it then removes the ability of guilt. You sit there and go, that's not your fault, that's not my fault, that's not the horse's fault, that's your line in the sand. That's where you start. You have every measurement taken from that, and you can then follow improvement, and you can go, oh, that's worked, brilliant, well, I'll lean into that, or that's not worked, So we do need to objectify a lot more, and so on and so forth. But we're getting there slowly. The industry is getting there. My view is that it's a little bit backwards of how it's getting there, but that's my opinion. That's not kind of everybody's, which I wholeheartedly understand. But yeah, Emma's spot on. I love the approach which she did, which was kind of, I'm going to do a little bit of riding and then I'm actually going to come off, but you're still going to do more riding. You're still going to train in riding, but in hand. And you sit there and go, that is fascinating in terms of training, because we need to do more of that, because people just assume riding is going to be the way to get a horse fit. And as Maria and everybody says, the muscle fatigues over a period of time. So how can you train a horse with the riding so you get your kind of enjoyment of riding, but then actually go, right, okay, now we're going to do the groundwork? Or how about actually doing groundwork twice in a day if you can, and doing it kind of partitioned almost? Just like if you're, as an individual, a human, going to the gym, and you can kind of go, right, one day I'm going to concentrate on legs, one day I'm going to concentrate on arms, one day I'm going to concentrate on back. And if you can segment it, a training methodology like that, or so on and so forth, so that you're not just riding and then always trying to work the horse over the back, over the glutes, over the this, over the that. Yeah. And you almost kind of segment it in terms of, okay, this is what we're working on today. That's it. Nothing more. Then tomorrow we're going to work more on kind of back and kind of those ones. Next day we're going to do work more on the hamstrings and so on and so forth. So what you're allowing is you're working the muscle groups, just like you do in kind of human training, basically. A little bit more complicated to do it on a horse, but it is doable. It
is, and I think you spot on there, Brady, because because Mac is not allowed to jump or hack out because of his front feet. I have to be so creative with the exercises that I can do with him on the ground and ridden to keep him happy, because he's a very smart horse. He gets bored really quickly and then he starts acting like a fool. So I've come up with so many different exercises and fun things to do with him to help teach, strengthen his core, teach him coordination, all in preparation for doing dressage, but not that he knows that. Without the excitement of going across country or anything like that. Cantering through a puddle in the outdoor is about as near as cross country as he goes. It's been a journey.
I think going back to what you said, Maria, about fatiguing, this is what loading a horse is about, regardless of what you weigh. But the horse's back will sink as it fatigues, same as ours, really. So there is that. But we'll come on to the horse in a moment. I just want Bradley to settle a score for me here, because this is a video of Mark Todd getting a leg up from a horse. Now he must be, I think he's 6'4", and he must be, how much would you say he weighed? It has to be 150, 160, maybe 170 pounds.
It's between 75 and 80 kilos, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I seem to remember he was weighing about 75 to 80 kilos max.
Okay. So
I don't know what that is in poundage. I'd have to work that out again.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly show you this, because if there was a lady rider the same weight as him, she's going to look possibly overweight. But here is a man who potentially looks very trim, and yet put a woman beside him of the same weight, and they're not the same, are they?
No. So the reason, there's a couple of reasons: anthropometric measurements. Obviously, men, Mark being a lot taller, and a woman generally going to be a little bit shorter. And the thing is also, this is you've kind of fallen into a bit of a trap, and it is a quite common trap, especially when you're looking at horse riders. You look at Mark Todd; he's 6'4". Okay, well, that's a boon in some regards, but it's also a massive negative in terms of riding. You suddenly got a huge length, and you've got a higher center of gravity. Now, if you look at a woman who's the same weight, but she's going to be theoretically a lot smaller, a lot shorter, she has a lower center of gravity. And as we know, the center of gravity is essentially, when you're saddle fitting, what you're trying to do in saddle fitting is trying to marry two center of gravities on top of each other. That is the fundamental basic principle of saddle fitting. If you strip away about structures of trees and padding and all of that kind of overcomplicated stuff. The very simplistic principle of saddle fitting is to put one center of gravity as close to the horse's center of gravity. Now, as I said, Mark, if he's taller, his center of gravity is going to be a lot higher up. You've also then got various body shapes as well, so you've also got to factor that in, and that doesn't come down to pelvic structures and various things like that. We don't need to go into kind of gynecoid, platoid, and kind of anthropoid, and so on and so forth, kind of pelvic shapes and so on and so forth. There are set ways which how the body distributes basically adipose tissue or fat. And that is both a boon and a problem as well. But kind of we'll talk about that.
We're going to come on to that.
Yeah, so we're going to come on to that. But that's where it becomes quite fascinating, because fat doesn't necessarily mean negative in some regards. And there's lots of other factors which are more specific to women, such as breast tissue, and how breast tissue works, and how breast tissue kind of when I say works, I mean works under movement. So because it becomes quite pendular in the way it kind of moves. So there's a lot of other things which we have to kind of talk about and consider when we're talking about the comparison of men and women in terms of weight. So yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'll just show you this film. You come back to it here, and
but the fundamental principle is that when Mark is getting thrown up onto that horse, he's engaging a huge amount of his core stability muscles.
Right. So
I'm his core muscles, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. So it's an extreme example, but it's something I think Emma will identify with. Yeah.
He nearly gets thrown over the other side.
Yeah. I saw that.
That's a repeat.
Yeah. And that is because he's helping so much.
Yes.
And the person who's throwing him up isn't expecting that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
he's used to get on racehorses, and that's you learn to jump.
But his control is supreme. Yeah. And we're going to see what looks like a 75, 80 kilo female rider now in a second. Here. Oh, no. Here. Here. And there's Mark. He doesn't even have to wait for the horse to stand still. He can just follow it wherever it goes.
He's one of the best balanced riders in the world.
Yeah.
But I still think it's all about core stability, isn't it? And balance and control of one's body.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So excellent. And also muscles weigh more than fat, don't they, in terms of mass?
Yeah.
So
you might think you're not reducing weight, or that you're failing because you're not losing weight. But if you are on an exercise program, you could be gaining, or it could be counteracting it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to my share screen and the window, and back to Mark. So I'm just going to just go over a couple of questions and comments that are there, and then we will come on to Maria and the horse, the effects on the horse. So let's go back to my questions. Cutting out full carbs and minimizing sugar has had a huge impact on my well-being. So yeah, that's definitely the way to go as a first, is to try to reduce sugar intake, because it's very difficult to resist if you like it. And Bradley looked up the 21 stone, and that is 294 pounds. And from the USA, I see pads used to replace saddle fit, often making the fit even more unstable and no better in fit. I do not disagree that pads have a place, but they can be a problem as well. Yes, they can be a problem. And yeah, things like memory foam to back pain sufferers can make it worse. So they are definitely, to me, they're prescription items, individual, both for the horse and the rider.
What we have to realize here is that the Southern Europe has for a long time left the stuffing of panels. They all use foam panels, and the foam panel is generally much thinner than a stuffed.
Yeah.
So and they have catered to riders who have many horses, professionals. So basically, the idea has been to make it very simple for riders with a lot of jumping horses, mainly in the stable, to just move the same saddle from horse to horse with a different number of pads under. And this is where this is coming from. So I think we're going to have to go to another forum on that question.
Yeah.
Because it is so complicated, and it really does not work for most of those horses.
Yeah.
It will, if you have 7 going into that saddle, you might have 2 that it works for. You might have a third where it actually works with the pad, and then you will have 4 where it's completely not working. So the idea of making it possible for a rider with many horses to refit the saddle by using something else underneath it is an interesting idea. But if we're going to use it, we have to get much better at how we combine that saddle and pad to that particular horse. And we're not there yet.
Okay. Great. Well, yeah, that's a whole other session, isn't it?
Yeah, very.
Excellent. So, yeah, Maria, so what have we got here?
Okay. Well, since we're not there with the science yet, I've just decided to try to help people who are looking at this to see what might be going on with a horse where you've had a problem with the load. Now, this problem does not come solely from a rider being heavy. So there is no point of really discussing this or that many kilos or pounds unless we actually bring it back to what the horse looks like. So my idea here is just to give an idea of how we can all go out into the stable and look at horses to say, okay, is this horse carrying its load in a way that is making this horse better, that is making this horse body work the way it's designed to work, and that's going to make this horse last? Or is the horse actually not carrying its load in the way that it should? So on this particular picture, you see there's a lot of arrows and things going on. But if you look at the pelvis, you can see that it's tilted forward towards the horse's head. So that means that the tail comes higher up. So where the tail is attaching is very high. And this is very, very common with horses that are not able to resist the force of the rider's weight or of the work that it's doing under the particular saddle and rider combination that it has. So as Bradley was saying before, most of the horses I see looking like this are actually dressage horses where the rider's been sitting too far back. And they would then turn up with this very flat pelvis and a lot of swelling in the loins, in the lumbar back. And then you would typically, you bring out somebody who would do massage, and they would try to relieve the lumbar back. Anybody recognize that? That then a lot of work is done in that area. Anybody who tilts their pelvis forward will feel how the lumbar back actually goes into tension. So the solution here is not the massage therapist. It's to look at how and where do we load this horse. So anybody who's having horses where the pelvis is not neutral, where it's actually tilted forward, the arrow shows where the pelvis should go. It should come down a little bit so that you get the tail in a slightly lower position. And as the tail comes down and the pelvis comes down, the horse starts activating and pulling on the longissimus dorsi. So the longissimus is attached from back to front, and it's pulled by where the pelvis is and how it loads the hind legs in the stance phase. So if the horse is dropping the pelvis forward, it is not activating or able to activate its long back muscle the way it should. And then you start to get problems around the withers because you're not getting the density of the muscle further forward. So a lot of these horses will also then have quite a big tension further down along the rib line in the ilicostalis part of the back muscle. So they actually end up trying to stabilize themselves using another back part of their back muscle. So that's just an idea. So if we have a pelvis that's tilting forward and a swelling in the lumbar area, we are normally having a load that is not helping the horse to do its work properly, to lift the rider properly. So any questions on that one?
Let's have a look.
Bradley, what are you thinking? You see a lot of these also?
Yeah, I see a lot of those. And the thing is as that's not just about, that's more about the horse training methodology rather than necessarily fitting of a saddle. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on there. What you also get is then reduction in breathing mechanics and so on and so forth. So there's a whole cascade of
problems
which will occur. And that goes then into girthing issues and so on and so forth, which is a whole nother thing as well. So you can literally see it all fall apart. But yeah, absolutely, that's common as well.
So when I see these horses, we really want the rider to do what Emma has done, to start turning them around before we fit them.
Oh, absolutely.
I was just going to ask, would you fit a saddle to that horse? Would a saddle improve it if the rider is seated differently, or would you have to see the rider and how they ride as well? So
you would have to see the whole thing, because actually if the rider is moved forward and the horse is able to start lifting, depending on the rider ability. So sometimes you will end up in a situation where you're like, okay, if we do it right and we try it and the horse gives us the response that it actually starts to work with its pelvis, come up with the back, push the front up, okay, then we can go ahead. If it's still plodding along with the pelvis tilted forward, we don't go ahead.
Right.
So the horse has to give us the answer.
Fascinating. Shall we do the next slide?
Yeah. This is, unfortunately, the dark picture is the last one, and it's not so easy to see. This was the horse that a client of us, she was getting help from a physio with her own body. And I think that the black and white picture to the right, bottom right, was taken just after she test ridden this horse. He felt very strong and heavy for her to ride. He was quite a light rider, but the horse felt very, very heavy. The top picture is when he came home. So at that point, he's not ridden yet. But what you're seeing here is that a horse that has been ridden with a dropped front. So he has not been able to push his front up. So this is not necessarily from the rider's weight either. This is from the riding technique. So there's a lot of guilt being put on to rider because of their weight out there. But if we don't look at how the horse is actually responding to what we're doing with it when we're riding, we're not doing it a service. So it doesn't really matter if you're heavy or light. If the horse still looks like this, we're dropping its front, then the wither seems shorter. And it's also going to seem wider in the back because the withers come closer to the shoulders. Then that horse is not really functional. So if you go out there and see that the withers seem really short, the croup is higher, and the horse is dropping like that in the front, the back is leaning forward, then you have an issue with how you're actually training that horse. So it may not be your weight. It may be, how you're attacking it and how you're actually training it. The last picture is the dark one, and that you can see there's no dip on the horse's back anymore. He's horizontal. So the back is not leaning forward at all. It is horizontal, and then the withers look higher and longer. So that's what we need to look for. So if we go to the next picture, we have a horse that is extreme.
Ooh.
Okay, so this left picture was sent to me by somebody I did not know, and she needed a saddle. This was a jumping horse, well-bred, bought from Belgium, imported by a Swedish champion to Sweden. And she found herself in this position where I basically just asked if she was riding that horse, and she said, no, not right now. In fact, if we let him into the field, he can't stop. So everyone will say, okay, he's standing very strange here. And yes, he is. He's trying to resist falling forward. So this is why he's holding his head up and using his brachii, the muscles at the bottom of his neck and up, because he has to keep his head up, not to fall forward. So you see how that back is leaning forward, and how the angle of the withers seem really, really sharp. And then you look at his pelvis. His pelvis is tilted the other way around. So he looks like he's tucking his butt.
Yeah.
If you'd seen that picture closer up, you will also see that right in front of his sacrum, he's got a dip. So his muscle is dipping. You end up with like a slight hole right in front of his sacrum. Can you see that? So it's like you got a hole and a bump. So instead of the swelling of the dressage horse, this horse is not connected at all through its pelvis and its longissimus. He just basically tilts his pelvis in under him, but he can't resist. He just does it to push away. So he's pushing forward, but he cannot resist falling forward. So what I asked this lady to do, I said, we cannot fit a saddle to this horse. So what we need to do is to see if he can find his balance again. And she worked him in hand for 10 days, basically as walking up and down a slope, going a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. So the next picture, which is top picture to the right, is after like 4 or 5 days. And then the last picture at the bottom is 10 or 11 days after. So you see how the withers change, how the neck change, what muscles he's using in his neck, and how the pelvis tilt is changing. So what I want to do with this picture is to make anyone who's got a horse that they feel is hard to ride to go out and really look at, what does my horse really look like? Is the back leaning forward? What is happening with the pelvis? Does this horse have muscles at all in the lumbar area? Are they pumped, or are they like no muscles there? What does it look like around the withers? Are they like sharp and short with no muscles under? Or do we have a nice wither with a muscle around it, not pumped, but with a muscle around it? Just by looking at your horse, you can then establish that no, things are really not going right with what we're doing right now. The horse cannot keep its balance. It is compensating. So compensate is what the horse will do for a heavy rider or with a lighter rider when you have a situation that the horse cannot cope with because it's not fit enough. It doesn't have the core or the strength in its back or the braking power in its stance to carry and lift the rider up. So in this case, this is not a heavy rider. Still, the horse is sinking behind the withers. So what we need to be aware of and get better at is to look at what is the top line looking like.
Mm.
And if we use that as a guideline, we can then decide how we are doing our training.
So this very much seems to be where perhaps a vet comes in.
The vets don't look at this normally.
Mm. And I think
A
it's
lot of
difficult.
horses I get that look like this will have passed the vet recently
Yeah.
because the horse may just be purchased.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the vets are used to sport horses having no muscles behind their shoulders, for example. They sometimes even think that that is how that horse has evolved and how it looks.
And it's difficult to see the potential when you
Yeah.
don't know the history of the horse. But presumably, obviously, this horse was performing at a high level, therefore the posture was overlooked. And as long as it could bring some prizes home.
Yeah, but then suddenly it couldn't, so nobody
Yeah.
could ride it, and
Okay.
they ended up having to do the work again.
Yeah.
So just by understanding that if your horse is carrying its head in a certain way, that is a function of that horse trying to balance.
Yeah.
It's not a function of it trying to get away from your work or resisting what you're asking it to do.
Yeah.
It's a function of how it tries to counterbalance what is really going on with its back and its hind end.
Hmm.
And people don't realize then, so then they will try to pull the head down.
Yeah.
So you can think, the head and the neck has leverage forward.
Yeah.
Really over 80% of the weight is in front of the horse's hips.
Mm.
So if the horse has only pushing power and is falling forward, you don't want to pull its head down even more forward.
No.
Because the horse is going to fall forward even faster, and then it has to speed up, putting its legs down faster.
Mm.
So I would not say that, the force of a heavy rider, like we talked about before, is not equal to bad. A force of an unstable rider who does not know how to engage their own core is a bigger risk.
Mm.
Especially if you're then trying to force the horse into a position that you've been taught that the horse should be in.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's mostly what my PhD is about. But Bradley, did you want to add anything there?
No, that's pretty much all spot on. I can't really argue with that at all. It's completely logical, and yes, it's tried and tested and proven methodology. So can't.
And although I would say that a good body worker could potentially arrive at the second picture, the top right, could arrive at that in one session, but it still needs the exercise to bring about. But although
there's always a problem with body workers. I'm one, so this is the thing I always have to explain to a lot of clients when I see horses like the first picture, and you sit there and you have to explain to a client is that if that horse is stable, and I in a perverted way, it has a perversion of stability because it's protectionist. So if I come in as a physio or an osteopath or a chiropractor or a masseuse or anything like that, and I look at that horse and I'm like, oh, right, I can make a big change to that horse. I can really help it. Well, the problem is you might loosen it off. You might make that horse feel brilliant and loose and floppy, but you've completely removed any form of stability. And I'm not saying kind of all stability is bad, but you sit there and go, even if it's a perverted form of stability, it is there to try and protect. So you very often, I've had to go to clients and I'm like, look, I can only release a small amount of that, but you have got to go off and then build that horse up and create it and make it stronger. Then I can come back in 2 weeks time or a week's time and I can release it again, and it's much more gradual steppy rather than look at the big change which I've done in one treatment. It's amazing, because you can almost guarantee you're going to get a phone call 3 days later which says my horse is crippled. what the hell's going on. Dun, dun,
Falling
dun.
into heaps.
A body worker can go in and do that work, but there's a massive risk reward process going on there. You can do it, but you got to be bloody confident what you're doing, that it's not going to screw the horse up. And my opinion is that you kind of go, well, actually, just to reduce that kind of risk, just do it much slower and kind of steppy. But yeah, from a body worker's perspective, you look at that scenario and you kind of, sometimes you do kind of rub your hands and kind of go, I can really help this horse. This is going to be great. This is things. But then you've got to kind of check back your ego and go, no, I've got to do the right thing, which is slow it down and work with
which is a great point, because I think that the whole thing that we are moving towards is that we need to work together to do our own small part, and to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do my part right now, because it's not going to serve your horse. For me, fitting a saddle right now is not going to serve your horse. I will, say that, getting an osteopath in here, because you're going to have things that they can help you with, but that's just a window of opportunity for you to start the training so that your horse can then build the right muscles and the right core. And once you've done that, you call me back in a month and we see what the situation is. Let's look at your horse again, and then we go from there. So I think that if more riders understand what they see when they look at their horse, we're going to end up doing much better things together.
And I think also normal posture is elusive, that we're so used to seeing, perhaps not as extreme as that, but it's difficult to recognize the potential of a good posture. And obviously in this case as well, you can't just address the horse, the rider, and has to be checked, see how they ride. Why is this horse, why has it ended up like this?
Can I just add that I think as well, a heavier rider sometimes gets blame for this sort of thing in horses, where it isn't really the rider load or the forces of the rider that has done this or has caused that particular issue, but you often would get the bad rap for it. So I think trying to educate people that yes, okay, we still have to think about the horse's welfare from a weight rider ratio, but we also have to think about it's not just always the weight of the rider that can cause issues.
No, it's not about dropping a dress size or two, so we shouldn't point the finger. We've got other things.
And we do get I do have been subject to having the finger pointed at me and told me, I was told my legs are too short to do dressage, go and do something else, and you shouldn't ride, you're too heavy, and they don't know what I do to ensure my horses are comfortable and happy. And I think that's just
they don't have the full picture. All very interesting. So Maria, I've got one more for you. Is this you're talking about you're getting us to look at the drop?
Yeah. Okay. So what a lot of riders may not realize, and some fitters may not realize, is that as the horse starts working and engaging in riding, we talk about getting the withers up, and we don't realize it's not just about the withers coming up, it's about actually the whole trunk coming up between the shoulders. And if the horse does this, it takes a different shape. So this is just a measure that somebody has put on a horse before and after riding it. So what you have here is a measure that's probably taken before they rode, and now you see that the horse has changed because it's come down. So you see the measure of where the horse used to be or could be when it does a lift, and you see how it sags down when it doesn't lift. So we need to understand that the back is very dynamic. We can't really fit a saddle to what we see in the stable. And some horses will look like, they have been sagging quite a lot. Take them out, see them in a lunge, see them lifting to get an idea how that horse engages the pelvis and the back, and then go back into fitting, because the horse may change a lot. And still, this is not really about rider weight. It's about rider posture and about both horse and rider actually connecting the core, using their core properly.
I'm aware that this drop measurement is taken for supplying a saddle for the horse. So that might be something we need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What we do typically, if we see that if the horse seems a little bit low, because a lot of horses we meet are low in the front today, we actually take that measure and we take 2 measures across at the base of the withers and further forward. And then we ride, and then we take it again, because that means that the rider can then see that, okay, things change. If we become aware that things change, we become a little bit more humble towards, okay, did we measure this horse for a saddle? Exactly when did we measure this horse? How much muscle did it have? How engaged was it? How was it ridden? So we can't really come out there and say, oh, I made a saddle to measure and it didn't fit, because the horse is too dynamic.
Yeah.
Whoever is fitting needs to make the rider aware, and also take that into account, that we have posture changes, and that changes the way the saddle will function on that back.
Yeah. It is all about the horse, saddle, and the rider. We can't get away from that, especially if there is a horse that perhaps is not fit to be ridden, or not quite as fit as it should be to be ridden. We've gone over time, and I wonder if Bradley would still be kind enough to deliver his presentation.
Yeah, of course, more than happy.
Okay.
I'm just fully aware of everybody else who's got to kind of go through a barrage of information, which is going to really hit them quite hard.
Oh, go for it, because they can always look at the replay again if they can't take. They can pause you. Bradley.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay, fantastic. So let me stop sharing this, and you start sharing yours. And while you're doing that, I mean, something we touched on earlier, we did evolve to get information from our feet. So the stability information, we're not evolved to get that from our seat and seated and moving. It's from the feet that we get the information for our body, our upper body, to be stable. So that's a big one for me, is that, how do you stabilize with your seat? Because another couple of thousand years we might be fine, but for now it's problematic. And by the way, of all the viewers that have been viewing this, I think this one set a record for viewers remaining. So we're doing a very good job of keeping them very interested.
Excellent.
In what we're going to say next.
I add something to what he was talking about and what you were talking about, and that is that the upper body creates leverage.
Yes.
So apart from just having the point of gravity at the right place, the rider creates leverage with their upper body, and that complicates it for the horse. Whoa. And it creates more weight to one side or the other when it's moving, like Emma felt when her horse was not happy because she couldn't keep her upper body stable.
I had no stability at all. I was like completely at the forces of gravity, and it upset him. He wasn't strong enough through his core. You have to just take a step back and think to myself, right, how am I going to fix this to be better for me and for your horse?
Yeah.
And sometimes it means getting off.
There we go. Right.
That's still a tunnel. Oh, here we are.
Is that the tunnel we're going down, Bradley?
It is going to be a big tunnel.
Rabbit holes.
I warn you. Right. So let's go for the real nerdy bits. So I apologise. This is going to be a very deep dive.
Yes, and sorry, you can't have a break either because we're running late.
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. Right, so let's talk about fat distribution. So obviously fat, which we all know, which we're talking about in terms of weight, because we talk about weight and we have a subconscious relationship that if you're talking about weight, you're talking about fat. So a lot of people, when we talk about the weight issue, they assume about fat. We've talked about it earlier where we're talking about muscle weight heavier than fat, so on and so forth. But for this, fat is not entirely, where you distribute your fat is not entirely under your control. Obviously, the factors, your genes, sex, male and female, age, and hormone levels. Now, as we get older, we do store fat in different areas. And what we do is we store fat as we get older more viscerally, so more internally. And I'll show you a diagram later on of what we mean by that. And this is where we were talking about earlier about pregnancy, weight and hormones. So as we get older, the decline in hormones and the decline in like testosterone and estrogen has a knock-on effect in terms of you will put on more weight, i.e. fat. So all of these types of things are really important to understand when you're fitting a saddle. Is you can't obviously check your client's genes, you can't do that. But obviously male, female, the age, hormone levels. So hormone levels, as I say, is more to do with the age. So if you've got a client who is in their kind of 50s and they're kind of male, we know that their testosterone levels will naturally be dropping off a little bit more, which you then obviously have to do an observation of your client in front of you. And as I say, we will show you an image later on of how fat is stored. But we all got to understand that there are different types of fat. Subcutaneous fat, which is what we all kind of look at in terms of those horrible kind of fat programs where they kind of show people who have a lot of kind of subcutaneous fat is stored underneath the skin. So it's stored between the muscle layer and the skin. So it's the type which you can kind of poke and prod and kind of pinch and so on and so forth. But we also have another type of fat, which is called visceral fat, which is where the person kind of looks relatively kind of normal in terms of their body shape, but they have a kind of little pot belly. Typically, there are other reasons why a pot belly can be present, but in this scenario, they generally store it all around their internal organs. Now, the difficulty with that is that that's kind of almost a bit of a hidden killer. It can pose quite serious health risks. But in terms of the connotations for saddle fitting, we will go into a little bit later. But visceral fat, if you have anybody with visceral fat, you have got to be aware that they're kind of, it does pose quite a few other health risks. Now, there's another layer, which is another process of fat, which is called brown fat. That generally you will see in children. You don't generally see it in adults. It does exist. It does sit generally around the kind of chest and shoulders. And it's kind of more common. You'll generally get kind of people with brown fat kind of more in chilly conditions rather than south of the equator, if you see what I mean. So that's also a factor to be aware of, is that brown fat is basically the fat you burn off to keep warm is the best way to think about that. Now, we all look at fat and go, oh, that's got to be bad. And as you can see at the bottom, I say, resist the urge to judge the jiggle. It can be a good thing. Subcutaneous fat is obviously, it's an energy store. And this is where we talk about kind of, you can be fat, but you can also be strong. And I'm not saying fit, but I'm saying strong. So it's a way of storing energy. It helps with your brain and various other things. A small amount of kind of fat also helps in maintaining a healthy blood sugar level. So yeah, do not overly judge somebody who is overweight. There are many reasons why. And the way people can be overweight as well, as I said, there are genetic conditions, which means that people are naturally bigger. And this is where we're talking about the visceral fat. So obviously where it's down around the belly. And this is quite a serious thing. So if you are a practitioner, obviously you should know this in terms of with humans. But visceral fat is really, really quite worrisome, because obviously you're a higher ratio of having diabetes, higher ratio of certain cancers and strokes, high blood pressure, heart disease. It is not good to have this. It is more common that you will have visceral fat in men in terms of the presentation. So you'll generally see more men having a lot of visceral fat, but that is the way they are presenting. Women also distribute fat more of a subcutaneous level. So, but it is very big risk, that kind of fat distribution. Now, the big thing which I just want to kind of touch on is BMI. Obviously, everybody worries about BMI scores. BMI is an interesting subject matter. You know, it was never actually intended to be a comprehensive measure of somebody's weight and health, because the BMI scale has now been kind of slightly perverted as a way of kind of measuring your health. And the BMI is not a way of measuring your health. It was quite big in the 1970s. So it started 200 years ago, but in the 1970s, kind of the USA really got hold of it from an insurance perspective, because they needed a way to kind of really quantify people in terms of risk factors. So they kind of really latched on to the BMI scale. And obviously these definitions of being overweight and obese are continuously being tweaked and changed. So it's not a brilliant way of measuring how healthy people are, but there's also a big thing is that it's predominantly based on Caucasians, so white people, and it has massive implications in terms of people of color, which can lead to massive misdiagnosis. So we need to be aware of, if you're kind of treating people or you're looking at a kind of subtle fitting for people of kind of different ethnic backgrounds, if they give you a BMI score, don't read too much into it, because the BMI score is not actually beneficial for them in any way, shape or form. So this is the big picture which we kind of wanted to show you, is how fat is distributed. And we touched on that earlier. So you've got a lower body, you've got abdominal, subcutaneous, overall coverage, and visceral. So let's just start on the visceral, which is on the far right. That's where I said is where you've got that little pot belly. There's no real excess fat over the arms, onto the chest or anything like that, but they have that kind of little bulge. Then going to the left is overall coverage. So these types of people will have a very large distribution of fat over their entire body. And that's where you kind of get the trousers don't fit, the tops don't fit, and various things like that. Then you've got abdominal subcutaneous. So this is where their arms look relatively normal, but they start putting weight more around their kind of abdominal cavity, and you get this kind of overhang of fat. So it's more kind of centered around the gut. And then lower body is where you get that typical pear shape on women, more around the hips and the thighs. Now, there is a reason why I'm showing you these images, is because what I mentioned earlier about something called center of gravity. Each four of these, and these are not just four separates, these can amalgamate in certain things, because the visceral used to be called in Chinese medicine that like everything to do with the liver, and the lower body was to do with ovary issues and so on and so forth. So, it's more to do with, from a Chinese medicine perspective, these body shapes also indicate other elements in terms of health issues or things to focus on. Now, we're trying to keep things relatively scientific. We can go into the Chinese methodology and so on and so forth, or the Far Asian kind of methodology of how they approach things, but that's kind of maybe not for here and now, but I can always do it another time. But the reasons why I say this is because when you look at these four body types, consider where the center of gravity is going to sit. Now, center of gravity is quite a fascinating thing because it's not a fixed measure. It's not a fixed area. And it can move within the body and it can move out of the body as well. And that becomes more important for later on, which we're going to talk about. Because we talk about center of gravity on top of the horse and center of gravity of the rider on top of the horse, so on and so forth. But I just want you to kind of look at that image, and we may come back to it if you so want, to kind of go through it in a little bit more detail. But look at those 4 images and really think where the center of gravity is going to sit in those 4 places. Now, something which is more specific to women, and it's slightly awkward that obviously a man's talking about this, but obviously we need to talk about it. Women have something which men don't have, which is obviously breast tissue. Now, that has a impact in terms of weight, and that has an impact in terms of center of gravity and leverage and movement. So the reasons why we've kind of pulled this chart up is to give you a rough idea of how much weight a breast tissue is, and it's per breast. Okay, so if you are a 34B, you have got 0.7 pounds. That's one breast, so it's actually 1.4 pounds, 330 odd kilograms, not kilos. God, that would be heavy. But yeah, dear God. Well, no, but the thing is you do get kind of women who have very large breasts, and they are essentially looking at 1 kilo per breast, which then has an impact upon center of gravity, movement, breathing, so on and so forth. Which we've all got.
Is that the same if they have implants?
So implants are slightly different, and they also behave slightly differently as well, because there are essentially 2 different types of breast tissue enhancements, what we call on top of the muscle, so on top of the pectoralis muscle, or kind of embedded underneath the pectoralis muscle, and they behave slightly differently. So you can have the breast tissue augmentation, which is basically looks like a big dinner plate and just like a balloon pumped up under the skin, and they just kind of look like a giant mound, basically. Or you can have the ones which look more natural, which are the underneath the pectoralis muscle, but they do behave slightly differently in terms of movement patterns and so on and so forth, which is where we're going next. So this is a bit of research which was done for breast tissue in 3-dimensional movements for running, hilariously enough. So this diagram on the right shows the movement pattern of breast tissue, so what we call pert breast tissue and Pitonic breast tissue. Pitonic is, in the most polite way of describing it, is where it's all gone a little bit south. So it's kind of sagging slightly. Now, obviously, the reasons why this is important is because the weight of the breast tissue does reduce ever so slightly when a breast tissue does shrink or does sag, but they suddenly behave completely differently as well. So obviously, with the Pitonic breast, you have a greater drop in terms of the XY axis, which is the dorsal plane. So that is the cut through. So you have more of an up-down movement, and then into the XZ transverse plane, you got more of a kind of a greater drop to a -4. So there's, as we generally know, that with kind of Pitonic breast is that the breast tissue will become greater in its mobility, which is why bras and bra design specifically for sport is really, really important, because if you have a breast tissue which is moving around a lot more, then obviously that has a greater impact upon the center of gravity and how that rider, and it also has an impact upon the posture of the rider as well, in terms of their kind of neck, their shoulders, their thorax, their musculature of the lower back. So all of that is really, really important, because if you haven't got enough support in the breast tissue, then all of a sudden the rider is going to collapse, because they're going to try and protect their breast tissue as much as possible. So when you're dealing with clients, and I'm not at all ever condoning that you should ask people about their breast tissue and whether they've got platonic breasts or breast augmentation, because that is a line too far. But sometimes clients do volunteer information, and obviously having that knowledge that if they're wearing the correct sports bra or support mechanism for bras, that has a knock-on effect in terms of their center of gravity, their movement patterns, how they're able to strengthen up their back muscles, which means that you can actually help them quite a lot in that as well. Any questions so far? Because I can't see any questions. So
I have a question actually, Bradley, because it really does strike a chord with me, because that's one thing I really struggled with when I started riding again, because it didn't even occur to me to basically to strap those puppies down, and it did make a huge difference to my ability to balance myself and stay upright in the saddle and keep my posture good. And then I watched a video of myself coming down the center line and thought, oh, I know exactly what I need to go and do. And went and got a very, very good
bra. Yes.
Yeah.
The thing is as you reduce weight as well, your breast tissue will shrink as well. So that has a knock-on effect as well. But yeah,
and it's not a subject people talk about normally, so it's really great to see some science behind it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, this was why it was slightly kind of, I didn't know whether to add this or not, but it is very, very important, because if you're looking at center of gravity, movement, strength of the back and strength of the rider and so on and so forth, breast tissue is one of the big differences between men and women.
With this, Bradley, with this leverage that the breast actually is creating on the front side, quite high up forward than on women, did they look at the strategy, what the woman will do with her upper body? Because we are blaming women now, or we are talking about, leaning backwards a little bit with the upper body.
Yeah.
And could that also be, for some women, a reaction of actually handling the breast weight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if your breast tissue is quite enlarged naturally, that's pulling your shoulders forward, and that creates kind of muscular issues in terms of the chest muscles. It creates what we call a kyphotic thoracic spine, so a slight curve into the thoracic spine, and you have this collapsed position, almost like hunched shoulders. And there's also sociological elements to this as well. A lot of women do not want to show off their breasts because of society which we live in, and because it's very male centric, the whole issue with actually bringing your shoulders back and pushing your chest out and actually standing in vertical alignment. It can be quite intimidating because it draws the eye to a certain area, and there's the whole psychology, and that's a cultural thing that needs to change in terms of kind of the overt kind of masculinity of society. But then we're just man bashing, so I can man bash as best as, trust me, it's can
I just add, I do see people, ladies leaning back to try and compensate for this extra weight in the breast, and what I see happening then is it compresses the horse's back.
Yes. And this is where actually having the correct fitting bra or sports bra to actually kind of compress and reduce that kind of movement of the breast tissue is really, really important, because you may have somebody who is actually very strong and very capable rider, but they have completely forgotten about the way breast tissue works, in terms of, you actually sit there and go, right, you just need to pull that weight in as close to your center of gravity as possible. And that can have a huge impact, because obviously, we don't want riders suddenly sitting further back, because then that has knock-on effects. It's you make one small change, but there's 6 other compensation changes which occur because you're trying to correct one. And that's what we don't want, if you see what I mean.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. Right. So, and this is where we're harping on about the center of gravity. Center of gravity for the horse. Center of gravity for the horse is T12, T13, roughly. Now, that depends very much on the conformation of the horse. So this is just a gross generalization. So if the horse is standing and it's suddenly bum high, then the center of gravity will move, and it generally will move forward. If the horse is very much wither high and overly developed in front of the wither, then the center of gravity is going to slightly shift further back. But then that's when the horse is static, and hopefully the center of gravity is also smack bang in the center of the horse, i.e. where the kind of in the center. If you can look onto the right furthermost image, obviously the horse's center of gravity can be right in line with the sternum all the way up, but the center of gravity can move, and it can move, and it does move, and it acts like a pendulum almost. When the horse is moving, i.e. walk, trot and canter, the center of gravity will move. The center of gravity can move outside of the horse's body in extreme cases. It doesn't generally move outside of the body when you're doing something like walk and trot, and hopefully not in canter, but it can do. There are situations when the horse is doing like a barrel racing, and the center of gravity will literally move outside of the horse's kind of mass, or outside of the horse's body, because the horse is pivoting around a barrel. So all of a sudden, you've got a center of gravity which is outside of the body, albeit for a short period of time, and then moves back into the center of the horse. Now, that also happens when the horse jumps and when it lands, and so on and so forth. So the whole point is where I kind of mentioned earlier, the center of gravity of the horse and the rider is essentially what you're trying to do when you saddle fit. Now, the center of gravity for a rider is generally in and around the navel area, but obviously going back to those images of people who are quite enlarged, that center of gravity will shift and will move. If you have somebody who has a center of gravity, or basically has enlarged breasts, all of a sudden that center of gravity will go up. It will go kind of closer towards the head. If somebody has quite a lot of adipose tissue around the pelvis, the center of gravity will become lower. But as I say, what's interesting is how the center of gravity changes in terms of your posture. And this is where you kind of look at A, B, all the way to F. Now you can see what we have here is A is theoretically the perfect posture. Your ankle, your center of gravity, and your head, essentially just slightly in front of your ear, is your vertical alignment, is where your center of gravity is. Now, if you have B, which is what we call a lordotic or a slight lean forward, change in posture, your center of gravity has gone forward. That creates greater leverage. So now your weight is no longer distributed, or the center of gravity isn't distributed along your ankle, it's now distributed into the middle of your foot, and so on and so forth, with all of the C, D, E, and F on how they have a knock-on effect. So B is just where you slightly lean forward.
Do you have these on horse as well, when they start squeezing the knees and the center of gravity moves further up?
I wish that doesn't. I wish that doesn't exist. I was having to draw, but it is. The thing is that you can literally look at that image and you can apply it. And there should be a way of actually, if somebody is very good at artwork, then you can basically apply the same principles of center of gravity moving forward, and how that has a knock-on effect in terms of the horse's center of gravity. Because if you look at kind of number B, where they're just leaning forward, the center of gravity has gone forward, what do you think is going to happen to the center of gravity of the horse? All of a sudden that has to shift, that has to move, because the horse, you've got to remember, is the horse is always trying to balance something on top of itself. The horse is always trying to find balance. It's like a human having a child or kind of on top of your shoulders. If the child leans forward, then instinctively you go forward with it, because what you're trying to do is put the weight back under your center of gravity. Same thing with what the horse is trying to do. If you're leaning forward, the horse is always going to be going forward, because it's trying to always catch you and pull you back. And you have this kind of reactionary kind of process going on.
In both the forward, backwards, and in the lateral direction.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that's where you have kind of the other issues of, such as scoliosis or any kind of musculoskeletal issue which exists, such as a rotationary scoliosis or a lateral scoliosis, if they have one leg longer than the other or they don't, if they have, the way they're particularly left or right arm dominant, all of those types of things. So this is just looking at it in one plane. When you start involving the laterals, it becomes infinitely more complex.
And this, to me, so this looks like the meaning of life for stirrups, because this to me looks like a massive stirrup problem, and why they're a problem.
To a degree, yes.
You don't have to go there because it's late.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you really want to go there?
Well, yes,
the next picture. We put that for the next. Stirrups is a very interesting thing. That's
the stirrup summit. Yeah, that's amazing. I've never seen that represented that way.
Yeah, because
so
stirrup bars, it's the way saddles are designed, which is why I've kind of gone into saddle design rather than anything else, because you sit there.
Let's not go there now, because it's
let's not go there. That's a very big topic.
You get to the barrel also.
you can see where the one of the issues is in terms of the center of gravity of the rider. So then, as I said, what is the point of you being a saddle fitter? So one of my definitions, and the most simplistic definition I have for saddle fitters, is that you are there to facilitate the amalgamation of both centers of gravity as efficiently and as effectively as possible. Now, notice I'm saying center of gravity. I am not saying balance. So there's a reason why I'm not saying balance, because balance has so many sub-connotations within the equestrian world. When we say balance, different people mean different things. So a trainer is going to be looking at the balance of the horse in perpetual motion. A farrier is going to be looking at the balance of the foot from the way it strikes the ground. And this is the difficulty, because when you say words like balance, they mean so many things to so many different people. So hence why I have stayed with center of gravity, to make it easier. Now, as we kind of say, static center of gravity on a horse and a rider is very, very easy. And as kind of Maria has touched earlier, is fitting a saddle when it's static, i.e. it's standing still. There is no lift, there is no elevation, there is no movement, nothing. Dynamic center of gravity and fitting a saddle to a dynamically moving animal and rider is just evolving process. You've got to get very comfortable with the process, that it is never finished, it is never done, it is never perfect, because everything is always moving and slightly in sync or out of sync. And that is the both kind of benefit and problem of horse riding, and the frustration of horse riding is that you never get it right all the time. We're all learning, it's always different, and so on and so forth. Even different weather conditions change the way the horse's back lifts, and so on and so forth. If they're shaved, or if they've got a blanket cut, or if they're not, and so on. It's huge. So yes, so this is why we're kind of saying we are in a perpetual race, and I liken it to a gazelle and a cheetah, because the gazelle and the cheetah are always evolving. You know, the gazelle is always evolving to be quicker than the cheetah, and the cheetah is having to evolve to catch the gazelle. So you're in this kind of perpetual cycle of improvement and kind of evolution. And that is your role as a saddle fitter, is to kind of marry these two center of gravities. But these two center of gravities are also going to change. And, you know, the center of gravity in somebody who is quite overweight or quite large or quite weak is there's going to be a lot of movement of that center of gravity. It's going to be moving in quite a big way, maybe in a circular motion, but the actual circumference, the actual diameter of that movement is going to be quite large. And then in somebody who's quite fit and quite strong and very good in their core, the actual movement of the center of gravity is going to shrink. And it's going to become very, very kind of reduced in the diameter and the way it moves. So when you're looking at people, if they're quite unbalanced, you kind of go, you know, we can point at all of the issues, but fundamentally look at it, they have a large moving center of gravity. And then somebody who is extremely strong and extremely fit and kind of so on and so forth, they have a very small moving center of gravity, but it's a center of gravity which is also under their control. Somebody who is
I tested this in 2004 unintentionally by asking the question, why does the horse move better in one saddle than the other, even though both of them seem to fit equally well? So we called in a few riders and horses where the horses had shown much better movement and contentment in one particular saddle, and we rode them with both the saddles.
Yeah.
And what we found was that it had nothing to do with the pressure underneath the saddle, but that small little thing that you can that you have when you use certain pressure mats, or most of them maybe, is that you can see how the weight has shifted.
Yeah. And
we found that the horse was the happiest where the weight shifted the least.
Yes.
So that has been, you know, the center of, I think, of my work from that discovery at 2004.
Yeah. Because you imagine, so for example, you imagine a backpack on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And now the backpack moves, you go for a run with a backpack on. And we can all do this. We can all wear a backpack, and we can wear a backpack quite loose and put a weight in it. You know, it can be a book, it can be, you know, a 5 kilo weight or something like that. And then go for a run. You'll notice that the backpack will shift and move. So then what you do is you stop, you tighten up the backpack, and then you go more for a run. And okay, yes, the backpack will still move, and it does, but now the weight is moving within a constrained environment. So then you stop, you take off the backpack, you then fix the weight somewhere within the backpack, you lock it in somewhere, and then you go for a run again, and you go, right, well, now that it's still the same weight, it doesn't matter that the weight hasn't changed. It's the way the weight has reduced its movement, which is why when you start looking at kind of all of the maths and the physics, every saddle, every product always has to obey the rules of science. You can't create a product which doesn't obey the rules of science. So you're absolutely spot on there, is that the center of gravity, if your center of gravity of the rider is moving around left and right and forward and backwards, the horse is completely unbalanced, and it's never going to feel comfortable. If you can then lock in that rider, and that's a poor terminology by me by saying lock in, but if you can reduce that center of gravity and minimize that kind of movement of that center of gravity of the rider, all of a sudden that horse is going to be a lot happier, because it knows where the weight is, and it becomes almost predictable for the horse.
Very predictable.
And then all of a sudden, if you've got a weight and a mass which is always predictable, it's always going to go in the same area, that means that the horse can then cope and adapt with that. So it becomes a lot more kind of thing.
And the horse doesn't have to use energy to try to constantly shift to be where you are.
Exactly.
So we see horses literally going from not wanting to go forward, or stressing forward, or being a little bit all over the place, or not really connected between the back and the front, to be finding perfect rhythm, being what we call 4-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Very easy to ride. just by stabilizing the rider and helping the rider to find that the right point of balance, the horse changes instantly. And this is why I think we cannot focus on weight alone.
No.
We must focus on the force that the rider actually creates by just moving or not being aware of how they move.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason why we kind of talked about weight, but then it's, as I said, we're kind of bringing in the center of gravity.
And so, I just wanted to add that adding lots of saddle pads and half pads doesn't make the, as we talked about earlier, doesn't make the stability any better. It just increases that roll effect for the horse.
So
because the horse rotates and further.
Well, the other reason is that if you add more pads, you're also moving the center of gravity of the rider further away. But
for a larger rider, it's kind of, I'm heavier, so I must pad my horse's saddle up to the gills, which is absolutely the opposite of what you should be doing.
Yeah,
but
it's also that's also where material science comes into it quite heavily, because you're absolutely right. The logic would be, well, I've got to pad more. Well, you sit there and go, well, yes, but also no, because there are materials out there which are much better at force distribution and kind of force spread than there are kind of in terms of flock. And that's where it becomes really complex, because you actually then have to start looking at, for potentially the heavier rider, you've got to look at different densities of materials and different types of materials with different behavioral patterns of different types of foam, non-Newtonian foams, open-celled foams, closed-cell foams. And you've got to understand that some of those foams might only be temporary whilst you're trying to lose the weight or so on and so forth. So it becomes a much more kind of measured and calculable process, because
I've actually been testing different half pads and materials to see how different the reaction is of my horse.
I have some experience for this, and there are a couple of materials that work really well, and one is a British 3DO material. It's inside a pad called Invictus. And there's also a Poron material that works pretty good. I'm not very fond of the foam, the memory foam for heavy, because it just compresses too much, and it's not, for a lighter rider or for someone just adjusting the fit a little bit, that might work, but it also creates heat. So the non-Newtonian materials I would prefer for a heavier rider to create the stability and the impact control.
Well, the irony is, in all of those material sciences, they have something called data sheets. So they have, by European standards, by British standards, when you invent a new type of foam or cushioning material, it has to go through certain set rigid processes of evaluation. Now, what's fascinating is, we don't do that for saddles. It's quite amazing. But you sit there and go, if you can grab all those data sheets, you can then actually work it out. It is not complex, because if you know what the standard test is, you can then backtrack and go, right, well, 3 mil of this, 6 mil of that, 20 mil of this, 10 mil of that will create a rebound or a negative force reduction to that weight of that rider. And it's quite fascinating that something as basic as that hasn't been created for horse riding. Because you sit there and go, that's the easiest way to battle or to fix the constant issue or negative connotation of rider weight. You sit there and go,
there is one kind of half pad that I know of that I'm currently using. I've been using it for about 12 months, that shock absorbs for both the horse and rider, and it has different layers of materials. I didn't think it was going to work, but it seems to.
But the thing is, and that's the thing, is that it's not me to sound rude, it's not overtly complex. When you actually look at it and you just go, it's a breakdown of material science. And what you've also got to look at, a lot of people are you know, ourselves included, are overtly looking at the panels. You sit there and go, I'm sorry, but there's also some foam and some padding which goes on top of the saddle to the underneath the rider's buttocks, which, you know, is then covered in foam and so on and so forth. So you sit there and go, you know, we're overtly focusing on a panel, but you sit there and go, there's the rider seat foam to also consider and look at there to counteract the. We all fall into the trap of just mainly focusing on a panel, and there's massive issues with the way panels are designed. In terms of, you actually look at the way they're structured. If you're trying to position the rider over a certain area of the panel, well, that's also the smallest surface area or smallest contact area with the horse's back, which is slightly ironic. And I understand the reasons why and why it's designed like that, but it is quite fascinating. But we'll get on to that because it's quite good fun. But any other questions so far?
Yes, one comment going back to breast comfort. Laugh out loud. I can tell how well I'm following my horse by my breast comfort in riding. It took me forever to find a well-made sports bra for a large bust.
Yep.
So that's it. We're all off bra shopping tomorrow. Well, us ladies anyway.
Yeah. Or men do have breast issues as well.
Yeah.
It's well, this is where things like there are certain companies, I think they're called Spanx and various things like that, which can basically conform and hold things in, and they're basically designed to compress everything. Now those are quite good in terms of trying to hold everything still, but the thing is as we can see, breast tissue doesn't behave like that. That research was done on women running, and what it showed was that breast tissue doesn't actually move up and down in a vertical line. It shows that breast tissue actually moves in a figure-of-8 pattern. When you look at those three axes all together, suddenly all of a sudden
we do. Yeah.
So I'm thinking tassels here. I don't know why.
This is going into a very weird.
You pass the watershed, so it's okay.
So
the tip I can give is that because I do have some people with larger breasts, is that they double up. So you have a good sports bra.
That's what I was just about to say.
Then you have a sports top that is elastic and a kind of like a full top.
Yeah.
And together these two actually minimize the action and hold things together, because the bra alone normally doesn't do it.
It doesn't do it. Yeah, exactly.
And but together they do it.
That's what I was getting to, is actually with larger breasted kind of individuals, what you end up having to do is double up. You have to kind of go, right, you need one, and then you kind of cross the straps over and do some funky stuff. And all of it just to kind of stop that kind of figure-of-8 pattern of movement, which you have to, as I say, consider. And as I say, that throws out the rider's center of gravity.
Wow, this is all very amazing. We have gone quite considerably over time. We've gone an hour over time. I wonder if this is a good natural breaking time, so that we could perhaps come back with panels, because I know you've got a lot more to say about that. And rather than scoot through this and the solutions because of the time, I think it would be fantastic if we could come back and add to this topic, if that's okay. Although Bradley, if you want to finish where you see your natural break,
whichever is easiest for you, I don't mind.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that we're not seeing the rest of this now, but we'll come back. Perhaps we could offer a discount to those who were waiting for that. And also we need to talk about how we really can, as saddle fitters, professionals, how we can broach the subject of the heavier rider, if we have to have a conversation. But it looks like now we can have a really intelligent, much more informed conversation about these things. So that certainly was the very much bigger picture than we'd anticipated. Surprisingly, we have not lost very many of us at all, which is amazing for a presentation at this time of the evening. So a huge thank you to Emma, Maria, Bradley, and you've made a massive contribution to this topic. And yeah, I can't wait to come back and dig even deeper. So thank you so much, and thank you to our audience. Just two more comments. SheFit works well. And Bradley, the breast discussion is great and relevant. Try not to feel so uncomfortable about discussing it. No, I don't think so. I mean, I mean, he did mention that men had them too, so maybe there's a bit of a marketing opportunity.
I think it's absolutely fantastic that you brought that subject up, because it's not been discussed at all.
No.
That I'm aware of, and it has a huge impact on rider stability and the horse's balance. I'm going to say the word balance.
The difficulty I have with it is obviously it's myself being a man and explaining about breast tissue. There is a little bit, as I said, I can man bash to the best of them. Trust me, there's ingrained male misogyny is one of the big things. And not me to sound rude, you should bring my wife in. She's way more knowledgeable about it, but she's a literacy specialist in terms of that, so it's quite fascinating. But the point is that obviously being a man talking about breast tissue, there are kind of certain connotations to that which are wholly inappropriate and kind of thing. So I don't want to come across as kind of looking at it from that perspective in that way. It's turning around and going, no, we need to have an adult conversation about breast tissue, about weight, about fat, the way it's distributed, so on and so forth. And we're not trying to be fattest or kind of be anything rather than that. You sit there and go, it just needs to be talked about. And the thing is that we're talking about in terms of how would you test people. One of my things is we should, in theory, as saddle fitters, do a process of core stability tests. For example, like getting somebody to stand on one leg and stand on the other leg, and you sit there and go, right, all I'm doing is I'm testing your balance, whether you can balance on your left leg for as long as on your right leg. Stand on your left leg, arms open, eyes open, and then for 30 seconds, okay, you can do that. Right, okay, now close your eyes. Oh, crikey, you're starting to wobble quite a lot, actually. So your ingrained balance on your left foot is a lot worse than your ingrained balance on your right foot. Should we get people to do a plank, core stability testing like that? But from a puritanical perspective, I would be turning around and going, yes. But the actual reality is that you can't, on a yard, you can't get people to do suddenly core stability tests and sit-ups, kind of planks.
We have quite a few tests that we actually put every saddle customer through, and we are developing that together also with the Rider Reboot with Dave Sanders, where we actually, when we see there is an issue, we try to help them forward to somebody who can understand and help them work on that issue. So we are basically working on what we call a red light, green light system, where people can find out themselves where they're at, if they would need maybe a physician, if they may have an injury that their body has helped them to hide, and they're having a big issue with their horse, then we will find that in a little bit more advanced test, and then they can get that help. We will also find if they're only slightly off and have that discussion with maybe some injuries, maybe being one-sided, maybe carrying babies on one hip. Big issue with compression of the rib cage on one side. So in our saddle fitting program today, that is all included, because we cannot help to balance that rider without knowing where the rider is at when we start.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean is but that needs to be more mainstream. That needs to be kind of encouraged within the industry.
Absolutely.
You sit there and because this is the problem within the industry. You sit there and go, that needs to be normalized.
The protocol of saddle fitting has to be has to evolve more than it has to date for many fitters. Not all, some of them are really fantastic and getting on board with all this stuff, but yeah, same for manufacturing. We do need to drive some change here. Well, a couple more comments. I'd love to come back and hear a lot more such valuable information. Thanks. And you may be a man, but this is science and data, not opinion.
Yeah, that's very true.
And from one of our committee members, thank you all so much. But yeah, that's all I can say. Thank you so much. What you've spoken about tonight and presented has been just completely groundbreaking. And yeah, let's come back and do it again, to be continued.
Yeah.
One question from Bradley, though. We have those 4 pictures. Which one of those riders is going to have the easiest point of gravity to put in the saddle? Because I think you were going to come back to that.
Yeah. Well, that is definitely a topic for another day.
And I'll go and test. I'll go and test all the sports bras out there and come back with real life.
Oh, so final comment, all very interesting. I like the visualization of riders controlling where their center of gravity is. Yeah, physics.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, well, we'll have to leave it there, much as we don't want to tear ourselves away from each other. So I'll say thank you and good night to the audience and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.